Hi guys, welcome back to a new video, and in today's video I'm going to talk about the picture profile settings that I use for my Sony mirrorless cameras and also the grading that I then apply to that picture profile setting in post. So my picture profile is actually a very simple one on the Sony cameras. I use the PP3 setting, which actually doesn't matter because the PP1, PP2, PP3 all the way down, they're actually just a container for the settings that you want to apply within the picture profile. So that doesn't really matter in itself, but I did just randomly select PP3 and I changed the gamma to Cine 4 and the color mode to Pro. I also changed the detail down to -4 when I'm using 4K footage, and when I'm using 1080 HD footage for 50p or 100p, I'm setting the detail to the standard 0. And that's all I do when it comes to picture profile settings. That's just my standard setting. So you might ask yourself, why am I not using S-Log2, which is the flattest color profile that you can actually have within the Sony mirrorless cameras? The reason for that is probably just its own whole separate video, to be honest, and I don't really want to get into it here, but basically the reason I don't use it is because I just found it to be more hassle than it's actually worth, especially when it comes to shooting events. Another good picture profile within the Sony a7 III in particular is the HLG profiles, which I have used as well, and I do use on occasions, but when it comes to events, when I'm using two cameras, I'm usually using my Sony a7S II and my Sony a7 III. The Sony a7S II doesn't actually have HLG built into the camera. That's why I'm still using Cine 4 generally when it comes to shooting weddings, for example, just because I can match up the cameras a lot easier. Another quick thing I want to mention is that I don't use LUTS, and I actually never have. I do quite enjoy the color grading process as a whole, so I do kind of like to start from the beginning. Also, the picture profile that I do use, the one that I mentioned before, Cine 4 with the color mode Pro, it does give me quite a good base to start off from. So having to use a LUT, for me, I find it not necessary. However, if I was shooting in a very flat picture profile like an S-Log2, I probably would need to use a LUT just to bring it back to some kind of Rec 709 that I could then work from. But like I say, the picture profile that I'm using in particular, I find it as a good base. And for me, for that reason, I've never really needed to use LUTs. Also, when it comes to doing my color correction and color grading, I'm doing it all inside Adobe Premiere Pro CC without using any external plugins, just using the standard Lumetri color that comes within Adobe Premiere Pro CC. Right, so with that being said, let's jump into Premiere Pro CC and I'll show you how I color grade a general clip from a wedding using the picture profile settings that I've just mentioned. All right, so with my clip selected, I'm gonna go up here to color. This is taking me into the color workspace, and basically what I want to have set up here is on the left my Lumetri scopes, and I normally just use the RGB parade, which pretty much gives me everything that I need. And on the right here is where you've got your actual Lumetri color panel, and I'm just going to start off here in the basic correction. So first up, the first thing I do is just play around with the contrast, push that up to around 30-ish, sometimes go up to 40, but normally around about 30 to 40 is good. And so on the left here, you just see the RGB parade just sort of stretching out as the contrast between the dark and the brighter areas increases. That looks about good to me. I might accentuate that a bit more by bringing up the highlights, just so that we highlight the bride and the groom a little bit more, and just bring down the darker areas as well that are around them, so it just makes them pop a little bit. So far that's what we've got, so we just sort of see them a little bit more. And yeah, apart from that, in the basic correction tab, I don't do anything else. Don't need to mess around with the whites or blacks in this scenario, and the saturation is fine. The next thing I do is just come down to color wheels, and if we just see that a little bit more, I'll nearly always just bring down the shadows into the bluey tealy area, and the midtones, which involves the skin tones, into the orangey reddy area, just to offset that blue. And what I always find that gives me is like, it takes away the magenta cast that I can get with Sony footage, or this picture profile in particular that I use. That's the kind of reddish magenta cast that it provides, and this kind of takes it away whilst keeping the skin tones intact, which I like. That's all I do there. I'll go to curves, and I'll just create a little bit of a curve at the bottom without affecting anything else literally just this little bit at the bottom just comes up, and what that does is it's actually bringing up the black level, so the blacks are not completely crushed down here at 0. It's just bringing them up a little bit more so that it's faded. And as you'll see, if I turn that on and off, all the darker black areas, it's got more of a fade to it, which just gives it that little bit more of a faded filmic look, in my opinion. I quite like that. Don't go overboard with it, just very, very slightly at the bottom there, just so that it's not touching the 0 value and making it a crushed black. Other than that, I will also go into the hue and saturation curve, and generally if I've got sort of greenish grass that I see in the background here, some green grass that's got a bit of a yellow tint to it, I like to change the color of that by selecting where the yellow starts and where the green sort of finishes. 2 points there and a midpoint, and bring down the saturation of that. And as you can see when you play around with it, if I go all the way down, it's just taking all the saturation out completely. If I go up, it's made it completely ridiculously green. But yeah, if I bring that down a little bit, that's what I like around about there. But yeah, going down to the hue versus hue, this is basically changing the color that you want it to change. So again, if I select the green points here, I want to make these greens a bit more tealish in their color. So I bring that down towards a teal a little bit, and it just gives a different look to the greens. So instead of having that sort of over-saturated yellow-green that you can sometimes get from mirrorless cameras and Sony cameras in particular, I just unselect and select. You can see if you just watch the greens only, just giving a nicer color in my opinion. I like that color when it comes to green, so that's what I try to go for. And if you do that within curves, rather than the whole saturation as a whole, if you're just affecting a particular color by selecting the greens, it's not going to affect any of the skin tones or any of the other colors within the image, which is great. And that, for me, I'd call it a day there. I think that looks like a good color correction and color grade overall. And just to switch it on and off, that was what we had before, and that's what we have after. Also, one other thing that I would generally try and do is just check skin tones, because that is very important. It's probably one of the most important things in your image. So if you just go over here to the left to opacity and click this pen tool, and then just select a part of the image that has skin tone only, like so. You just create a mask there with that pen tool. And then if I go into the Lumetri scopes, right click and click vector scope YUV. Basically this will tell me whether my skin tones are looking good or not. So this line here between the red and the yellow is actually known as the skin tone line on here. And if you've got information that you have selected here within the mask that falls on that skin tone line, which is doing here pretty much dead on, it shows that you've got accurate skin tone lines. And that will be the case for any type of skin, whether it be dark or lighter skin. It will all be shown accurately via this line. So if you are shifting over towards the yellow or the red, you might want to have to select colors with regards to your skin tone individually to try and shift that. But in this case, like I said, it's falling dead on, which means that that skin is the right color for this image, and that's what we want. So once you've got that and you're happy, then you can obviously go back into opacity on the left here, click on the mask, delete that, and just check your overall image if it's looking how you want it to. For me, that's looking fine before and after, and then yeah, I can move on. So there you go, guys. That is my color grading process for that particular picture profile that I use. One thing I want to mention is that obviously if I'm doing something like a narrative piece that requires a different kind of grade to tell the story, that's something that I will do. For example, if I'm shooting a narrative that's like a horror, for example, the grade will probably be quite different compared to if I'm shooting a wedding. I might shoot it quite a bit darker and bluer, for example. It all just depends. This grade that I was just showing you now is just something that I use generally, and it's like my go-to for things like weddings, corporate and YouTube, things like that. I'm just going straight to this one. But like I said, if it's a narrative piece, you might want to reconsider some things. You might want to make it a lot bluer, a lot more contrasty. It all just depends on what the story that you're trying to tell. So that's all I've got for you today, guys. And if you did enjoy the video, as always, then chuck a like on it. That'll help me out a lot. And if you want to see more stuff like this in the future, then obviously do subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Take care.